Well, if you've been following along with Kari Lake's election trial, you know that on Christmas Eve, the Arizona gubernatorial midterm election lawsuit against Governor-elect Katie Hobbs was dismissed by a Maricopa County Superior Court Judge, Peter Thompson, meaning that Katie Hobbs will be the governor of Arizona come January 5th. But this most likely will not be the end of Kari Lake's legal battle against election fraud that she's alleging, as the Arizona Republican gubernatorial candidate appealed the Maricopa County judge's decision yesterday. Lake has quite a battle ahead of her, considering the judge, Peter Thompson, found that Kari Lake lost what he called a valid election. And on Monday, just 2 days after the judge's ruling, Katie Hobbs tried to stick a legal bill on Kari Lake's team of nearly $700,000. The Arizona judge refused this to issue sanctions against Lake, as her lawsuit was, quote, not groundless. So at least that's some good news. The judge, Peter Thompson, also said, quote, the fact that plaintiff failed to meet the burden of clear and convincing evidence required for each element of the relevant state code does not equate to a finding that her claims were or were not groundless and presented in bad faith. However, Lake's team will be required to cover around $33,000 in fees to Hobbs' team. Joining me now to weigh in is criminal defense attorney Bob Bianchi on this. Bob, great to have you back on the show. Kari Lake, things are not looking good for her, legally speaking, right now. What do all these sanctions mean? I know Katie Hobbs was trying to pin nearly $1 million in fees on Kari Lake. What was that for? How did they get out of it?
Addison, it's not unusual when you lose a trial that lawyers will try to seek both sanctions and fees for the costs of the litigation. And it really is up to each judge to make a determination as to whether or not the allegations, while not proven, were completely frivolous. That's generally when you will see a court issue sanctions, if they feel that there was complete bad faith in this. What this judge basically said was that while the case wasn't proven, they believed that each lawyer on each side genuinely believed the arguments that they were making, and more in particular that the fact that the printers were not working or were working improperly, while it did not disenfranchise any voter, they said the judge said that was still a valid claim to bring forward, so I'm not going to award sanctions for bad faith. However, as you indicated, he did award around $27,000, I think it was, for the fees for expert witnesses, and so Ms. Lake is going to have to pay that, but it could have been substantially more. So there's nothing wrong with the winning side filing this. It happens all the time. I think the judge's ruling was reasoned and considered in not issuing a bad faith sanction, but rather costs for the litigation. Keep in mind, last point, Addison, I think claims were also filed in federal court where a judge, in fact, did sanction there, indicating that they felt that those claims were brought not in good faith. So I think you may want to go into the appeal next, but I'll leave my answer there for now.
Well, as far as the appeals goes, she has obviously a very long process ahead of her. What would be the scenario for Kari Lake to actually, she's not going to win anything substantial by January 5th, legally speaking. What would be the best case scenario for Kari Lake moving forward?
I really don't see any, Addison. I mean, the fact is that appeals are not do-overs. There has to be a mistake of law with respect to and the application of facts to a case. This judge was very clear on the law. The law is very clear. There has to be a provable, demonstrable, intentional. It doesn't have to be a pristine election. It doesn't have to be a perfect election. Negligence happens in some of these things. You have to show an actual purposeful or an intentional intent to do something, and that if, in fact, something nefarious did happen, it would have altered the outcome. The reason I mention this is that those are factual determinations that a trial court makes, and this judge made a pretty good record that those things simply were not proven. Appellate courts typically review the law, not the facts. They give great deference to the person who heard the case, that listened to the witnesses, that was able to evaluate the credibility. So I think it's a long shot. And the bottom line is, unless some which I can't see. She's going to get sworn into office, Ms. Hobbs as governor, and that's pretty much makes the appeal moot at that point.
Yeah, well, Kari Lake, I think, has a bright political future ahead of her. She's very well-spoken, very unfortunate to see everything that happened unfolded in Arizona. Bob, also want to get your comments on this. We've had you on a few times to provide updates for this. The Idaho mystery murder of these 4 college students. The killer or killers still have not been caught. However, one of the students' fathers is starting to speak out optimistically. He's saying that he's confident that the killer will be caught soon due to new DNA and video evidence. What is this evidence that is coming out that is causing him to be optimistic? What do you know?
I don't think he really knows anything factually. Essentially, what he was saying is that with all the video, and as we've discussed before, Addison, this is probably going to be a very DNA heavy, trace evidence heavy case. You don't kill 4 people in that close up and personal fashion without a lot of transfer of hair and fibers and blood. And oftentimes in a case like this, the defendant or the perpetrator themselves will be cut in a knife attack such as this. But I think the father is just speaking that he believes with all of that they should be able to solve the case. I don't think he has any additional information investigatively. And as you know, I have been very concerned. I've now solidified from my research that the Moscow Police Department is the lead agency. They are the ones taking this over. And the fact is, they do not have a lot of experience in murder cases, certainly one with heavy forensic evidence, I would believe. They are working with other agencies, but if I've often said, having done this literally, sometimes that gets more of a hindrance than not. Those other agencies can give support, can give supplies, can give aid, but not all the time do law enforcement agencies play well in the sandbox with one another. I hope that's not happening here, but nevertheless, if Moscow PD is the one in charge of the investigation, they're also the ones calling the shots at what happens investigatively. Look, we hope it works out. I've had stubborn, prickly murder cases that have taken 8 months, a year to solve. Sometimes we have cold cases that could be 10 years, 20 years. We hope it doesn't go in that direction. But, given how the police are asking for help with the public and with all these agencies, I'd imagine they'd have all the resources. It could be a data management issue because they have so much information. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. But, so let's just cross our fingers and hope that the answer, as we always say, is in the box. The answer's in the box. It's there. We process these scenes. We know we have all the information and evidence. We did all the evidence gathering. I would just make a suggestion to my friends out there in Idaho that there have been times where I have pulled the file from my investigators and legal team that were researching it, because sometimes you can become very pigeonholed, and sometimes suspects get cleared that ultimately, or individuals get cleared that ultimately, when you re-look at the file, we've been able to secure arrests and convictions. So sometimes a new set of eyes is important.
Well, we certainly hope justice is brought about quickly. Bob Bianchi from Law and Crime Network, great to have you back. Thank you.
Always a pleasure.